Hello, world. It's Ron Davis from Distinctions For Life. And of course, I wanted to start my live stream by scratching my nose, that being the most important thing that you can possibly do. And thank you for coming, whoever's here or will be here, or those of you who are going to be watching the replay later. I'm really excited today to have Tonia Adleta. Sorry, I just asked you how to pronounce it and then I screwed up. But Tonia is in a group that I am in of entrepreneurs, a mastermind group. I did a live stream with some people from my other mastermind group a couple of weeks ago. And then I did a stream with Jason Van Orden, who leads the mastermind group that Tonia and I are both in. And she is a serial entrepreneur. She's doing a whole bunch of things. At one point in our group, they said, please make a list of what it is that you do. And she put her list in that group. And I was like, you're making me tired just reading your list. So it will be very interesting to get her viewpoint on entrepreneurship and what kind of thoughts and things that people have. And without further ado, I am going to bring Tonia in. Hello, Tonia.
Hi there. How are you?
And I butchered your name just right after practicing it.
Adleta. All right. You got it.
Adleta.
All good.
There we go.
All good.
Yeah. So, Tonia, I'm going to give you the chance to tell us about what you do and that kind of thing. But tell us in terms of your origin story. How did you end up doing so many things?
Oh, that's a really good question. It's slightly tricky in the sense that, we live in such a world that really promotes the idea of niching down to the level of, really dialing in what it is that you do, who you do it for, all that kind of specificity. I love that. And I always felt that I had a hard time choosing just one thing for a lot of different reasons. One is because I have a lot of different interests and I apparently don't do well always repeating the same thing over and over again. Like I had a temp job once that was data entry. And that was the worst possible thing for me to experience because it was the same place, the same activity at all times. Like that, it was not good. So all of that to say, who I am, my origin story, I think a lot of it comes down to, I grew up living all over the place. I moved 16 times before I graduated high school. That made me really good at remembering people's names. And it made me really good at thinking that I should be leaving every 12 months or so. So, kind of having this emotional distancing. We're practicing all the social and physical distancing now, but I really did have to learn how to stay emotionally in one place because it was, just something. If there was an internal clock almost that was like, yeah, it's time to start packing up. Let's get out of here. So that was an interesting little, sideway into the rest of my world. When I first started my first planning company, I should say, I was a junior in college and I knew I wanted to be a wedding planner before anybody really knew what that was. But thank God for the movie with Jennifer Lopez and Matthew McConaughey. One of my first weddings that summer, I had a groomsman who for his very life could not remember my name and instead just called me J-Lo all weekend. And I was like, okay, so I don't think I quite deserve that, moniker. That's very lofty, but hey, at least you know what my job is. So that was the beginning of the planning side of things. And like so many of us, that's taken so many different twists and turns throughout my career. It's now been over 25 years, I think. So I have a full service wedding and event planning company, which let me tell you, this is a great time to be an event planner, heavy on the sarcasm. And then on top of that, we do floral design and we're very, very close to launching wedding planning DIY, which is going to help couples without, those that don't have the ability to work with a planner directly. So that's one side of my world.
So have you always been entrepreneurial? I mean, you started this in college. That was 5 years ago.
Oh, sure.
And but have you always had an interest in starting? You talked about being in a temp job where you had to do the same thing over and over again, and that sucked.
Brutal.
Have you always been an entrepreneur?
I guess in some way I have. And I tend to think about it more about who we are at the core as entrepreneurs, as opposed to the jobs that we might be fulfilling in that moment. So I would tell you, absolutely, even when I was in the corporate world, I was still an entrepreneur, because I was trying to find a way to make things work, whether that be more efficiencies or my own personal productivity, or, whatever that type of thing is. I think that sometimes this idea of entrepreneurship gets elevated to this place that so few people feel like they can attain it, when in reality, I think what makes us different is that not only are we scrappy and we're willing to put in the work to get where we want to go, but we have this slightly different way of seeing things, and we want to make those connections. We want to see the cause and effect come together. And for a lot of us, we want to make a difference with what we're doing. And sometimes the corporate structure just doesn't support that kind of idealism.
That made me think, because you're right that there is this sort of mindset for, even when you're in the corporate world. It's interesting. I have a friend who's actually going to be on the show on Thursday, and he does a lot of stuff with entrepreneurship here in Abilene, in West Texas. And one of the things that we try to do is make it relevant to our Air Force Base. So we have an Air Force Base here, Dyess Air Force Base. It's the home of the B-1. And they talk about it as being innovative. So that's the word they use. They want their airmen to be innovative. But one of the problems that we have, and that I have, is, and this is related to the military, but it's also related to corporate, is how innovative do you really want? Right. And how that's a very difficult thing, especially in a big corporation. If you're like in a small business, you're an employee when there's like 10 other people in your company, you're talking to the ultimate decision maker on a daily basis. So it's not like you can't have more of an impact. But when you're in a 100,000 person organization, making a change is not what they want you to do.
No, not so much.
So what do you think is the difference? So you talked about sort of having that sort of corporate background and having similarities to what you do as an entrepreneur. What do you think what are the differences between being corporate and being an entrepreneur?
I think it comes down to a couple of different things. One is where you can align with the greater vision. So I think one of the benefits of being in a corporate situation is that, typically speaking, there's more structure. There is a clearly identified vision or mission and a strategical plan to get there. When you're on the flip side of that, we hope, seriously. Right now, some things might be up for revision. But when you're in this entrepreneur space, especially a solopreneur, you don't have any of that structure. And I think that's why people like you and I tend to go to these mastermind type of groups, because we appreciate not only the structure that, we're going to meet every Wednesday afternoon, that provides us, but also the frameworks, the idea, it's the way of thinking that then we can turn around and apply to how we're doing the work and how we're showing up in the world. When you flip that back to the corporate idea, there's definitely a set of expectations that are laid out for you, but sometimes those expectations are not actually going to be in the higher good of both you and either your company or your clients or the product that you're creating. Sometimes there's such a disconnect that it's a disservice, not only to you, but also to the culture that you're a part of.
Yeah, I think that's true. And another thing, of course, is, and you kind of mentioned it, is resources. Right. If you're working for a big company, you've got resources out the wazoo, probably, hopefully, hopefully. If it's important. But even if it's not important, you have all these things that once you're a solopreneur, you no longer take for granted. Like,
right.
You've got HR that's handling all of that stuff. You're not doing payroll yourself. You're not figuring out the tax things. You have a lawyer you can just call up and say, before we say this thing, can I say this thing?
Right.
So there's all these resources that you take for granted. And I do think that what's going on now, where they're pushing everybody out of the building, is going to show some of those differences too.
Absolutely. I don't know that we're going to be able to come back to normal. I think we're all going to be working together to find a new normal for our work environments after this, because how do you pull back an entire nation's workforce, or at least, 90% of it, working from home? Because you can't argue that, it's not possible. You've already done it.
That's true. You can't argue it's not possible. Yeah, I saw that too, that I'm subscribed to a number of email lists for remote workers. And I think this was Stack Overflow's list. There was an article and it said, going 100% remote. And for some reason, when I read the title, I didn't think of it as a personal thing. And I think that's what the article is about. It's like you going 100% remote. I thought about it as a national thing, right? Because we've always talked about, wouldn't it be great if we just made everybody remote and stopped having offices? Well, we did it. We literally just did it. We just said, this is it. Starting next week, nobody goes to the office.
And I think what's going to be really fascinating in this, though, is to pay attention to what happens from a sociological perspective, and the idea of, we need each other. We are, as people, as human beings, just even the physical touch component, to be able to hug someone, even just simple little things of, like, you're talking about the resources, just going to the kitchen and grabbing a cup of coffee. Like, yes, I can go to my own kitchen and I can get a cup of coffee, but the chance of being able to catch up with someone, or, how was your weekend, or, any of those little things, all of those things matter to our fabric in society. So it's going to be absolutely fascinating to see. And I say that with all respect and complete desire for wholeness for everyone in this situation. I don't mean to belittle the hardship that anyone is experiencing in this, but to step out of that for a second and to look at the collective experience. I'm really fascinated to watch how this impacts us as a society and what we choose to value to take with us into the new normal, because we're not going to be going back to the way it was.
Yeah. Interestingly, I don't think we'll be 100% remote. I mean, even though we're figuring out how to do it, I think there'll definitely be people who are ready to go back to the office.
Oh, for sure.
It's kind of funny. My wife and I, we homeschooled our kids, and the homeschool community thinks this is funny. Not the coronavirus is funny, but all this, every time you see a Facebook post about, oh my God, my kids have been home for 2 days and I'm going insane. And you're like, yeah. And like all the homeschool parents are like, nothing changed for my kids. They all had to do that. So it's one of those things where everybody's kind of being forced into something that they haven't done. But I do think we are going to see changes. And I think people will value being around people more than they used to in the past. Right? Like when you have it, you take it for granted and you don't value it. But when you don't have it, then you're like, oh, I actually did go to the coffee. I did go get coffee. I did go to the break room. I did talk to people.
Yeah.
And now the only way to do that is with great intentionality, which is an interesting. I find that the concept of intentionality a very fascinating one. Let me ask you a question. So I've had this discussion with my wife. I set goals at the beginning of the year. One of my relationship goals, because you're like, okay, what is a relationship goal? I don't even know what that means. Like, you literally have no idea what to do. So I made just habit goals for that relationship. And so literally on my to-do list every day is a reoccurring thing to kiss my wife and tell her I love her. Okay. So now she will see me do that. She will see me look at my to-do list, go, oh, honey, I love you, and kiss you. Right. And it's like, okay, so am I less loving because I went to the trouble to put her into my system to make sure things got done? Or would I be more loving if I only did it spontaneously and then it didn't happen?
I love that.
So what do you think? That's a question about intentionality.
You're totally putting me on the spot to be the tiebreaker.
You're the representative here for everybody, but
awesome.
Really it doesn't matter what you think. It matters what she thinks, and she's okay with it.
Well, and it's funny because that's exactly what I was going to say, is that what I find so fascinating and so beautiful about relationships is that the rules externally really don't matter. It's what is agreed upon and held to be true between the two of you. So if she's good with it, then you're good. It depends, I think, on the context of the relationship. And I think that, going back to this idea of the adjustments that we'll be making as a society, I think so many of those rules and the ways of being or the ways of thinking, everything is being reevaluated now. So there's an opportunity. I think there's always the opportunity there, but we forget. But there is a very obvious opportunity to reevaluate the choices we make on a regular basis. Some could argue that you're just being productive and you're just being efficient by putting it into the calendar so that you don't forget. And some others could argue, well, does it really mean the same thing if you're being told to go kiss your wife and tell her that you love her? You know what I mean? You could argue both ways. What we all say doesn't really matter. It's what the two of you think about it.
I think the thing that made me think of it is that as a manager, so say you were a manager of people in a corporation right now, and now suddenly your people are not around you. So you're not just going to bump into them and find out what's going on in their work. You're going to have to make it a point. You're going to have to be intentional about checking with your employees. You can't just have one meeting a day and think, oh, I'm good. You're going to have to get on Slack or get on all these tools that nobody knew how to use last month. And have an intentionality of connecting with them.
Absolutely.
And then we're going to be like, well, are you not a good manager because you have to put it in your to-do list to go check with your people? Are you a good manager if you don't, right?
Right. I see it slightly different in the sense of there's a different, again, set of expectations that come with management as a general rule than it does a personal relationship. So I think about it, we have this amazing team of interns that we're working with right now. And I see each of them in their individual career and what it is that they want to get out of the internship experience. And yet we also have the collective as a whole. So what works for the whole from a management perspective in terms of streamlining things, working out 9 different schedules for everybody to show up, at the same time, it's a different skill set than relationship building. So you've got, productivity management is one thing. Relationship building is a completely different skill set. Right. And I think so often when you're moving through the food chain in corporate, you might be really great at your job and then you get promoted to the next level, which is managing other people. Well, guess what? That's a whole nother skill set that you haven't necessarily been taught yet. So there's an opportunity for growth there that, maybe wasn't the case for you at the previous level.
So what, to get back to what I originally asked you to come on the show for, was what skills do you think that entrepreneurs need that might not be obvious or that are often overlooked?
I think vision is a big one, not so much in the sense of, I'm going to light the world on fire and here's how I'm going to change it. Although I personally really admire that kind of perspective. I think vision in the idea, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, to be able to see things that may seem disparate and may seem completely disconnected or not related in any way, shape, or form. But if you have the vision to be able to see the red thread that goes from here to here to here, then you can actually do something about that. And to your point of intentionality, it's one of my favorite things in the entire world to talk about. But to be able to say, this is what I see. And because I see this over here, here's how I can control my time and energy and my resources now to impact this change over here. But without seeing those different pieces on the flip side, I don't know how far or how successful you can be, on the back end of it, if you will.
Right. Interesting. So, yeah, I just did a series on public speaking, which probably was ill-timed because I find that's a skill that entrepreneurs don't think they're going to need. And then, as I've told people, every entrepreneur or small business owner is going to get the opportunity to speak. You're going to get asked, and then are you going to be able to do it in a way that is effective? So I think of that as sort of a skill set. What beliefs? So I have this idea. I guess I should explain this to people watching this later. Hopefully it will be a little more fleshed out. And I told Tonia she was going to be a guinea pig for this, but I'm working on a framework for Distinctions for Life that as an entrepreneur, you need, you need beliefs, you need skills, you need knowledge, and you need people. So that's kind of where some of this is coming from. So there's the skills I just asked about, but what things did you believe either about business or entrepreneurship or yourself or other people that stood in your way when you started out and you had to replace or get over?
Such a good question, because I think beliefs and mindset that is an absolutely just fundamental part of not only entrepreneurship, but how we show up in the world at all. And so often we hold ourselves back from being who we really could be, like really living out that full potential, because we're still holding on to a thought process or a belief system that no longer serves us. So how that all plays out for me specifically, or how it has played out, victimhood has been a really big piece of this. Something that I didn't mention earlier in my whole origin story. I talked about the idea of when I started my first planning company. And then, I was young and in college, I graduated, I got married like the month after graduation, because that's what you did in the environment that I was in. I stayed home with my kids for the first couple of years, and I was just going back to corporate work. And then the kid's dad and I divorced. And ironically enough, we were actually working at the same corporate job, which I don't necessarily recommend, by the way. But that whole process, I think was maybe 3 months later, I then got laid off from that job. So I had just gotten the nerve to go back into corporate, got divorced, got laid off. I bought a house in the middle of all of that, had to declare bankruptcy, go through foreclosure. I mean, it was not a pretty year. 2008, by the way. So here we are, once again, about the all the things that come back and we get to revisit. What I found during that time, and it was so pervasive, it was so quiet, and underneath the foundation of everything that I was doing, I wasn't even fully aware of the ways that I was identifying myself as a victim. But I absolutely was. And it took me probably, I'd say probably 3 or 4 years. The more that I got into this idea of, if this isn't what I want, then what do I want? Going back to the idea of intentionality. To be more specific, I lost consciousness on the floor of my bathroom in my little mobile home that I bought, because my body was producing so much adrenaline that my heart couldn't keep up with it. It couldn't be processed. And that was the tail end of all the divorce process. And so with that was my big wake-up call. I always loved Plato's statement that the unexamined life is not worth living. So again, when we talk about intentionality, that's what I'm thinking of when I think about this. That was my invitation to examine my life. And I think for so many of us, what we're experiencing right now as a collective, we have an invitation here as well to examine our lives. What's working, what's not? How can we then leverage that to be intentional about the future that we create? So going back to this idea of, for me personally, what happened in that space, this idea of I'd stayed home with my kids because, that was what I wanted for our family. And now all of a sudden I'm in a joint custody situation. I've gone from having 100% of my time with my kids to then trying to figure out how to work 60 hours a week corporate and feeling already that pinch for time with them in the evenings. And now I'm in a 50-50 custody situation, and my corporate job didn't provide health insurance. So I was working 20 hours a week at Starbucks to get health insurance and lots of coffee. So, when you put all of that together, there was this constant, but this isn't what I want. This isn't what I want. So I got down to the point of saying, okay, what do I want? I know I want more time with my kids. I want to be there when they're there. And I want to do work that makes a difference. So with that, I was able to make a series of decisions over the next few years. And that led me into personal development, that led me into professional development. And in that whole process, there is a constant peeling back the layer. It's like the layers of onions that just like, it's an unending onion. There's always more layers to pull back. But I can't tell you how many times I've found this piece of, oh crap, I'm being a victim again. This isn't happening to me. What are the opportunities within this situation? I'm really good at finding the silver lining. But sometimes I'm so good at that I don't acknowledge the pain in and of itself first, because I just want to blast through that so I can find the silver lining and redeem the situation. There's still some victimhood in that. So for me personally, that was probably my number one issue that I will probably always deal with in some way, shape, or form.
Interesting. I use the term responsibility, and I'm actually taking it from 7 Habits from Covey, and it's the ability to respond. And I hate situations where I give that up, right? A lot of times people will well, anyway, when you start trying to figure out why this is happening, and the answers are things you no longer have under your control, you've just made yourself helpless, right? You've made yourself unable to respond.
Right.
So taking, God, I was actually working, I did a sort of a presentation thing for a judge in Dallas once, and they like 5 seconds and you can just tell one last thing to these people. And I was like, I tried to explain this to them, and literally it just sounds stupid when I gotta get a good articulation of responsibility. But I will always say, okay, if I say that is why this is happening, or that's why this happened, do I lose responsibility? And I'd almost rather be wrong in my belief than give up the responsibility. One of the examples, and it's kind of a weird one, but I used to work with some people who were in the pickup artist community, and they would say, a guy would go talk to a girl in a bar, and she would just shred him, and he would come back and he would be like, I'm terrible. Or he would turn around and call her names, right? Like, she's X, Y, and Z. And they'd go, look, guy, anything that happened over there was your fault. They're not in it. You could be wrong, right? Like, there's all kinds of reasons that she might have reacted that way that had nothing to do with you. There's a lot of reasons that it had nothing to do with you.
Right.
But if you say it's because of her, you're giving up all your ability to change, right? You've given up all your ability to change your behavior to get a different outcome in the future. And so that's what I kind of think of as responsibility. But when you say it that way, people don't always understand what you're saying, right? Your ability to respond is probably better way to say it.
Well, and I think too, there's so much power in that. There's so much potential in that, because, I love to talk about the idea of co-creating your reality. When you get to this place of being able to take full responsibility and the ability to respond, because I think they're intermingled, they're slightly different. But I think that when you're in that place and you can own the idea that where we are right now, for me personally, I'm going to say, the reality that I'm experiencing right now is a result of all the decisions that I've made that have led me to this. So if something about this isn't working, then what do I need to take responsibility for to change to then be able to create something different in the future? So I very much feel like it's this idea of the potential in that, the creative power that's in that. So I'm not to say that, I can make my whole life the way I want. I'm not, I'm not trying to have ideals of grandeur here, but I still have a responsibility to do the work, to know what it is that I want, and then to be able to put those plans in motion.
Right. That's definitely true. Well, Tonia, we have gone about half an hour, and I've decided that this show should be half an hour long, because somewhere in between half an hour and an hour, the energy dies. So I'm going to see it. It's been great. You have had a great energy, and you are much better at looking at the camera than I am. So where can people find out more about you, and what would you like viewers today and in the future to do as far as you're concerned and what you're working on?
I think there's 2 projects that I have worked on in the past, or that I am getting ready to work on again. One is the Single Parent Summit, and we have a free Facebook group there. So much of the advice that's out in the world as far as parenting doesn't really address the idea of either being a single parent or a co-parent or in a blended family. So that's something that, I feel very strongly about and want to be able to help in. So if that resonates with you, by all means, find us on Facebook and jump on in. And the other is that I have a podcast called Recovering Church Girls. And there's a little asterisk behind the word girls. And it includes all genders and all faiths. A lot of the conversations we have are very similar to some of the things we've talked about here, but this idea of what is it that we have been told to think about ourselves, and how has that impacted, really how we've shown up and who we've been up to this point? Is it still resonating? So it's not so much about dogma or doctrine as it is our own view of self and, our spirituality as individuals, instead of the conformity that we see in a lot of church cultures. So if that is something that resonates with you, I invite you to join in and be a part of the conversation over there.
Okay. Hey, could you drop those URLs in the chat. It should be
I
on the
would be
right side of the
happy
screen.
to.
That way they'll be there. I've been running the Recovering Church Girl podcast under this right now, but if you put it in the comments, then in the future, when people come to it, they will be able to find all of those things.
Sorry, I got the little rainbow spinning ball of death thing. That was not pretty.
Well, that always works that way. It's like my camera decided to refocus, but...
Okay, I think that's the right link for the Facebook group. If not, it is the Single Parent Summit, you'll be able to find us.
Okay. So did that come up on the chat? Oh, you just put in the private one.
Oh, sorry. I thought, well, I did, but not in the right place, apparently. All right, so let me switch over to live and I will get that corrected.
It's where it says comments at the top.
Unfortunately, I don't have the opportunity to do that.
Oh,
it doesn't
really?
give me no.
That's weird. I will do it then. I will copy and paste.
Sorry about
that. I'm going to have to figure out why that is. So.
Now, see, I can see yours, but I can't add any of my own.
Right. Huh. Well, I'm using a piece of software called StreamYard, which is great for live streaming. It's all web-based. It was pretty easy for you to get on, right?
It was indeed.
And but I'm still figuring it out. And as with all things.
I was going to say, like, and everybody else figuring out all sorts of virtual things right now.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for being on the show. And everybody who has been watching, thank you for watching. If you have not already subscribed to the Distinctions for Life channel, which if you're on YouTube, that is where you're watching this. And there's also the Distinctions for Life website, which is distinctionsforlife.tv. But if you want the short version, you can just say godfl.link, and that will get you there. And I put out new videos every week giving a distinction, which I think of as a small change that makes a big difference. And like I mentioned in here, we're just doing a series on public speaking, and we have some goal stuff. Anyway, there's lots of stuff there. Go check out the channel, subscribe if you haven't already, and go check out Tonia's stuff. And I will see you on Thursday, where we were talking with Mike Mikeworth, who we were going to talk with 2 weeks ago, and Ron gave blood. And, you know, they say whatever you do, you should give 100%. And apparently I did. And that's not to do what you do when you give blood. So we will have Mike on Thursday. If you subscribe, you will get notifications about that. And thanks again for being here.